Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on Qt Design Studio. During the session, if you have any questions, please submit them by the Q&A button at the top of the interface. Please only use the Q&A functionality to send your questions so we can answer them in an organized fashion. Those questions will be answered at the end, but feel free to ask them throughout the session. The webinar will be recorded and you will receive a copy of it delivered straight to your email account. Hope you enjoy, and now I'll hand over to our experts, Petref Saraci and Thomas Hartmann. Over to you.
Right, thank you, Sala. So hello, everybody. I'm very pleased today to talk about our new product, Qt Design Studio. Right, so let me just start introducing myself and also my co-speaker. So my name is Petref Saraci. I'm a product manager at the Qt company. I've been working with Qt for more than 10 years now, holding multiple roles within the company. And today I'm very happy and excited to announce Qt Design Studio. With me, I have Thomas Hartmann, a senior software engineer. He's leading the Qt Design Studio development. He's based together with me in the Berlin office. He has a great experience of 10 years with the Qt, and we are very happy today to talk about our new product. Right, so moving on to the next slide. So about today's agenda, what I would like to talk to you about is basically start with what we see today in the market and what we think is a typical workflow and what are some of those typical problems and pitfalls with those workflows. We will move on into introducing Qt Design Studio as such, walking through the feature sets and briefly just talking about them. Of course, we're talking about a tool here, a design tool. So demo time is absolutely a must. And that's why Thomas has prepared, I think, a very impressive demo, and we will see that later on. So demo, we will spend quite some time to show you the features and basically show the capabilities of those features and what you can do with those. We will have, of course, 5 to 10 minutes session of questions and answers. So please do not hesitate to send us your question, and we will be happy to try to answer that. Great, moving on. Right, so let's go a little bit and understand what we see today in the market when it comes to workflow, and particularly how designers and developers work and collaborate together. So we understand that designers and developers somewhat are in a bit different worlds, and they're using different tools, right? So we know typically designers work with Photoshop, right? They create sketches, they create graphic designs. So they use their favorite graphic design tool to actually design the user interface, the product vision as such. Now, what happens is that today, what we see is that designers have a hard time to communicate this clearly to the rest of the organization that they need to work with. So typically, designers then do their graphic designs, do their work, right, in their tools, and then they write some form of specification, some form of document. Well, typically, this is the specs, basically, what we call the HMI specs. Now, this is passed on to the development team later on, and now, of course, you can understand developers now have this graphic design, complicated specs, which they need to read, understand, interpret, and above all, implement it, just like the designer envisioned it earlier. So with this, we see quite many challenges that are raised up. So we understand that the designer at this point has no means to test his design. The designer is lacking the possibility to validate his design work. And imagine if this possibility would be given to him and he or she would be able to test the design right into the target device or target operating system as such. So this can cause a lot of round trips or even make the round trips last even longer. So The designer has to wait for the developer to test, to integrate, implement the feature, implement the design, and you can understand now how this can break and how iterations can last until the right vision, the right design is actually implemented in the right. Right, so basically, if I had to kind of like boil down, like what are the common challenges, right? So what do developers now face on the other side, right? So developers get a specs file, get a specs document, and now they need to understand that and understand the vision of this design and start implementing it. You can understand this will create a lot of iterations, a lot of communication, round trips between designers and developers. And of course, there's a lot of failures that can occur during this communication. Now, the question is, okay, let's say that at certain time you are agreeing to a certain implementation and you have your design. What happens if you want to change? What happens if you want to evolve your product? What happens if you want to reuse some of those elements, some of those graphic designs for yet another product family? So the problem begins again. You go back to square one, again, from the design point, you go to the visual design, and then implementation needs to be done, specifications have to be cleared again, and testing has to be done again. So a lot of time is spent around this. Right, so yeah, so questions, we will kind of, we will try to answer those questions basically right at the Q&A session, but thank you for that. Right, so moving on. So what we want to achieve with basically Qt Design Studio and the features that we are implementing with Design Studio is to bring the developers and the designers closer together. In fact, bring the designers right in the front seat of the UI development, of the overall UI and HMI implementation, and drive the whole HMI development. So with Design Studio, we believe that designers that can use their visual graphic tools, whatever they prefer, but then import those assets into the Design Studio and automatically get basically get the whole UI created for them based on those assets that were imported. And so the end result basically for the designer would be an actual UI code that they can send to the developers, or even better, they can actually use it themselves to run and validate on a reference target hardware. So in this way, designers would be able to validate immediately their design from day one without interfering, without disrupting the developer's work. At the same time, they can share this work, they can share their design work in a format that the developers can immediately pick, right? It is, in the end of the day, it's basically code that the developers can pick up, integrate their backends, integrate the application logic, and see and validate what can go wrong, or validate the feature set, validate the UI specs, and so forth. So basically, by bringing the designers and developers closer to each other, using our tools, and let's not forget our very powerful declarative language, QML, then designers are able to prototype from day one, and they're able to prototype for the target device right from the very first moment. Designers and developers that can work together to create reusable components. And these reusable components can be reused in several different prototypes, in several different prototype versions, or even prototypes of a different product family. Now, of course, we understand that this is a self-generated code. This is an automatic generated code, basically, based on our tools. And I will talk about those features later on. So there's a lot of time saved when the designers import their design, because they get the generated code automatically. Of course, if you're able to kind of create your UI design directly from your graphic tools, then you are ensuring the brand consistency, because that is what the designers can certainly tackle with their tools. So the designer makes sure to create a style guideline and make sure to keep that consistency through all the components that are being reused or recreated and so forth. In the end, last but not least, with our tools, you're able to create powerful and pixel perfect animations with the timeline editor that Thomas and I will show later on. Great. So what are some of those features that enable all of this, right? And what have you been working on, and what is somewhat the plan for the next year and also the half of 2018? Right, so what we have implemented is a Photoshop bridge, as we call it. So Qt Photoshop Bridge is a Photoshop plugin that we built in-house from scratch that enables designers to use Photoshop to create any complex UI right in Photoshop and immediately export that and parameterize how to export that in a very flexible and powerful way. Thomas will show that, how that works. It's very powerful. We've implemented a live preview. We call it QML live preview. So the QML live preview, it's a very simple runtime that allows the designers to preview their design work, so of course the developers as well, to preview their design work immediately, just with one pressing the run button from any moment. And not only they are able to preview, meaning they're actually running natively the UI, but they're also able to see the changes as they work on those designs. So it's actually hot reload functionality for the live preview. We also have a timeline editor that allows you to use keyframes to change properties, basically. And this is actually one of my favorite features. It's absolutely mind-blowing how easy it is to create animations. And you don't even have to have any kind of experience whatsoever doing those. Right. Now moving on to the next feature. So we have also introduced visual effects in the tooling. We have created somewhat, based on the existing APIs in Qt and QML, we have created out of the box drag and drop functionality for visual effects, basically. So you can apply a visual effect to any UI element of your screen. So you can literally, basically, pimp your UI at any part, at any pixel. And now we will try to show how easy that is. We also introduced shape items, so you can have somewhat a custom shape in QML directly into Design Studio. For now, we have introduced just a few of them, so like arc, pie, like rectangles with more functionality, right? We will try to show some of those. We also have a state editor that we have basically enhanced together with the animation, with the timeline editor, and as well as with the connection and binding editor, which will be significant features in order to enable real rapid prototyping. As well as we are looking to create basically project templates and wizards in order to make it easy for anyone without any previous experience to jumpstart Qt, QML, and also just design immediately. Now for the 2019, we have a high-level plan. Of course, we are looking for feedback. We are looking for as much feedback as possible. So that's very important to understand. But some of the key highlights for 2019 are as follow. So we're looking to integrate better with the Qt 3D Studio. We want to make it very easy and smoothly to use Design Studio and Qt 3D Studio to create UIs that are 2D and 3D and combined. We are looking also to create more Qt bridges, like the Photoshop bridge. We are looking now to Sketch, and this is something we're hoping to get sometime early 2019. We're also trying to understand how we can increase the prototyping capabilities by creating advanced state management of your UI. So managing the states of your UI, screen navigations, but also being able to simulate capabilities of your UI with data modeling. So very simple data model that you can simulate data inputs. We're looking to make Git support into Design Studio. Now, this may sound a little bit scary to all you designers out there, but rest assured, we will make it as easy, as intuitive as possible. So the Git support lies basically into the fact that the designers can collaborate a lot easier with each other by basically pulling and pushing into a Git repository. And we will make that as smooth, as easy as possible, as intuitive. So without really understanding the underneath concept behind it. You don't need to understand the underneath concepts. And also we're looking into creating advanced annotations, supports, and guideline support into the tool so that designers can leave different comments, annotate the design and guidelines so that developers then can pick that up and continue the implementation. Right, we also want to create and expand the design community as such for Qt, right? So we are, of course, a developer framework as such, but in the end of the day, developers and designers are getting as close. Yeah, we are also looking to basically helping and foster that ecosystem, the design ecosystem for us. Right, in regards to timeline, so the technology preview is being released early next week. So please stay tuned, news will come. But we're also looking to create a second technology preview around September time. And in December, we are looking to create or to release the Qt Design Studio version 1.0. Well, for 2019, we're looking into March, June, and December as target dates for the next versions of Design Studio. Great. So now we move to the demo time. I think this is pretty exciting. So yeah, I will get the questions probably in the end. It's a little bit better. All right. So now I'll hand over to Thomas. So Thomas will start the Design Studio. All right. So Thomas will start with the Photoshop. So we have a cluster designed entirely in Photoshop. And Thomas will now take you to a tour on how to export this design from Photoshop, show you a little bit about the Qt Photoshop bridge, some of the properties, and then look into importing it into Design Studio and animating some functionality there. Great, let's get started.
Okay, hello. This is the original cluster designed in Photoshop by our designer. And on the right here, you see a plugin called the Qt Bridge. This plugin we will use now to export this Photoshop file to QML, or more specifically, first we export it to an intermediate JSON format. Yeah, you can make a couple of settings here, especially where the file goes, and there are also specific properties for each layer. We will go into detail. I'll explain that in detail later. For now, let's just press this big export button. Then we basically say that we don't touch Photoshop for a while. Press OK, and now we wait. And while we are waiting, we create a new project in our Qt Design Studio with our new wizards. I would just create a new general Qt Quick project. I call it Webinar. And then we give it some default size.
Yeah, we also have some styling for the controls, but yes, for now we will not use those.
But in this project, we will only concentrate on what we export from Photoshop, so that's not very important. So now let's click Finish. And now the project is created and it's opened in the designer. And oh wait, you're stupid. You didn't see that because you still shared the Photoshop thing. So let's go back to Photoshop in any way.
Right.
Yeah, but Photoshop is now finished with the export. We click OK. And now let's really go to Qt Creator. where we just created the new project.
Yeah, we do it from scratch again.
Yeah, we can just do it again.
Just do it again.
So we say webinar 2. We create the same project again. Just wait a second. And now we have the project, which is basically empty. And now we go to the resources tab. We say add new resources. Now we get to the correct folder, which was webinar. And now we select the JSON metadata format that was exported from Photoshop. And now Qt Design Studio will basically convert that metadata format into QML. I double click here, and then we have to wait a little bit. And I go back to Photoshop. We use this intermediate format, so that's easier for us in the end to support multiple tools like Sketch that was already mentioned. But now let's go a little bit more into detail here. So on the left, we see the navigator of Photoshop where we can go through the layers. And on the right, you see our Qt bridge, and you see that for each layer, we can set certain properties. For example, we can say export as, and we can choose from component, child, merge, and skipped. Skipped, it's obvious. It will means that it's skipped. Merged means that all the layers beneath it are merged into one image. Child is kind of the default behavior. It's just one element of the QML file then. And component means that everything beneath this layer goes into a separate QML component.
Right. So I want to jump into this one because I think this is a very important feature. So what Thomas is telling us here is that right from Photoshop, the designer is able to define here what are some of the key components of his design. And by the moment, so once you are selecting basically like a layer and you're choosing this layer to be a component, that means that you will have a separate reusable QML component as a separate file. And we will see that, but I think that's very important to emphasize that in Photoshop, you're able to componentize directly your designs.
Let's go back to Qt Creator for now. And now the export is finished and we open the cluster. And since this is a tech preview, there's still a minor bug because the background is in front of everything. We just cleaned that up. And now let's zoom a little bit out. We see that we basically have Visivik, the same thing as in Photoshop. And in the navigator, you see that most of the things are components. That means they ended up in files of their own. And in the QML components here in our item library, we can see these components. And we, for example, can drag in the gear component if you want and play around with it. But for now, let's just delete it again. And we want to concentrate on the speedometer. And we can say, go into component here. Now we go inside the component and you see it here. And now we want to play around a little bit with that one. As you can see on the left in the navigator, we have basically the graphical assets, and then we have an empty layer here that contains all the text items. Actually, text items are preserved as text items, so we could change them now if we wanted. They're not translated by default. In this case, we don't want them to be translated. And yeah, we have more. We have a couple of more items here. We have a couple of more graphical elements, and then we have more text items. And in the end, we have, which will be very important soon, the speed needle. Let's zoom in a bit again so we can see that clearly. Okay, and what we want to do now is that we want to animate, or we want to basically define how the gauge behaves when the value changes. So for this, we want to rotate this PNG. But first, we want to define the rotation center. And for that, I drag in a new item and basically position it at the rotation center, or what I want to be the rotation center. And now, again, take the needle and reparent it into that item. So nothing happened. We don't see anything because this should not change anything. And we can now, for example, rename this. Let's call that rotation center. So now things become interesting. So first, what we do now is we add a timeline.
So if I may just jump in here again. So right now, basically, Thomas is creating features per each of the components, right? So imagine now the designer would be able to do this on his own. So the designer is able to export gauge components or the whole cluster, componentize between each of the UI element, and then the designer himself actually can immediately, after the export and importing it into Design Studio, can actually run the whole design without doing anything at all. So from that very first moment, you can run it. Now, Thomas is creating an animation to basically make the gauge spin according to some data. But I think it was important to emphasize that the designer can run immediately the project from the very first moment he or she imported it.
Yes, one thing, this is not actually animation, it's just a timeline for now. This timeline is not running in time. I will explain that further. But for now, we just have a start frame and end frame from 1 to 200, which is basically the values we have here. And I add that. And now we have the timeline down here from 0 to 100. That's exactly what we want. And now we select our rotation center. Actually, that is already selected. And now we want to basically enter the correct rotations so that we basically get the correct values. Yeah, I already played a little bit around with this thing, so I basically know them out of my head already. So I know that 207 is, oops, what did I do? Ah, this is scaling. No, we don't want to scale it, we want to rotate it. So 207 is actually the beginning. And now what I do is I set a keyframe at this position. And now I go to the end. I press the record button in this case. And I know that the end is 95. And I now the keyframe edit. Now I uncheck the record button because this is a little bit dangerous if it's checked at the wrong moments. And now you see we have the needle rotating basically as we change the timeline. And now we have a little bit more challenging task because we also want to animate or parameterize, as we call it, the arc. The arc is of course a PNG. We can't do much to that. For this, we have the new components, the studio components. I click here to have them in the item library. And then I drag over the new arc component.
So again, jumping in again here. So while Thomas is actually doing that, so what is Thomas doing is replacing the image, the arc image, right? The blue one, which is supposed to be kind of data driven. He's replacing it with the QML shape support that we just talked about earlier as part of the feature list. So in this way, by using the arc component, basically Thomas is able to parameterize it, control it, and animate it accordingly to the given data. As you can see, he's already now entering the right data for the arc, right? So now you have basically the right cap style, join style, stroke color, and well, the stroke color can be changed, of course, anytime. But now it seems to be close to what the image was, right? So this is how you get to a dynamic, basically, UI. Good.
So this, of course, in practice usually takes a little bit longer because you don't know these values. You really have to figure them out so it really fits over the original one. So let's do that. Yeah, it fits quite nicely over the original one. And then we want to hide the original one. So we make it invisible. So we just have now a new one, but it still has the wrong color. So we just go very shortly back to Photoshop. And we use the color picker here. Color picker. Why don't I see it here?
There you go.
We pick the correct color. We copy and paste it for now. And then we go back exactly. You share back to Qt Creator and enter the color for our arc as a stroke color. So now it has the correct blue. And now, of course, we also want to animate this thing. So I already created the full arc. That means we go to the end and just say for the end, insert keyframe. So now we have the correct keyframe for the end. And now we go to the beginning and press the record button again. And now we want to begin it, end it basically at the same point at the beginning, right? So it's empty. So that's it. And then we uncheck this thing again. And now we go through that again. And as you can see, now we have a nicely animated arc.
Thank you, Thomas. And you know, I need to make kind of a note here. None of us here are designers, so you can see how easy it was for Thomas to create a very simple animation according to the Photoshop's file. Right, so a lot of questions are coming in. Sorry guys, we will come to the questions. We just need to finish the demo. Right. Yep, let's continue.
So now we want to show the live preview shortly. So I can press here, so it enables the live preview. And now we get the live preview of that thing. And just to show you how nicely it works, let's just resize it a bit. Okay, for now, you just select the number in the middle. Usually you want to have that, of course, on a separate screen or even on the original hardware. So you could have the live preview running on your iMac 6 device or Android tablet while you work. That is a lot more convenient than to have it on the same screen on a laptop, of course. But let's just see. I basically changed this text, and it immediately changes in the live preview. And I immediately see, for example, that the centering is a bit off and not properly working, because this is basically just hard-coded value from Photoshop. So we can just try to fix this by basically saying centering it again, and then we say use centering here, and then we make it maybe a little bit bigger. Center it again.
Yeah. So while Thomas is doing that,
right.
this is
and now it should also work for 10. Yeah.
Right.
Stay centered for any number we enter there.
Yeah. So typically you would work with your reference hardware on this one to make it pixel perfect, to really match the resolution of your screen, like really kind of fix all the details on the pixel level.
Yes, and also see the final typography, how it looks on the device. So now we have to do one more thing. I close the live preview for now because it's taking too much space here. So now we have basically this parameterization from 0 to 200, and we want to expose that as a property of this component. For this, we go to the timeline, which is also here in our navigator. To see that, you might have set the correct filtering here, but for now it's here by default. And we have the timeline here, and we have the current frame property of the timeline. And we say export that as alias property. So now it's immediately exported as an alias property on the root item. We can see this here in the properties tab of the connection editor, and it has by default this little bit long name, timeline current frame, and we rename that simply to value. Right, and now we save, and now we go back to the original document where we come from, where this component is used. So we are here. Let's maybe zoom out again a bit so we see the complete cluster. Here we now have our component as we did it with a value class property, and we can set that to 50, and we get the result. Or even to, well, okay, that was too much, 200.
Can we live preview this so that we can add the value?
Yes, of course, we can live preview that.
Nice.
So we have the live preview again, we have the value, and now we set it to 100. And now typically you would bind that to your backend, which could be mocked up with JavaScript for now. That is basically our envisioned workflow, that first you have a JavaScript backend that is basically just providing mock data, and that will be replaced in the end, of course, with a real C++ backend. But now I'll close the preview again. I want to show you a tiny little bit more. So first, let's also add an animation to this one. And this we just keep the start to end 1000, that's fine. And we also create an animation, and we say it continues, and it's doing a ping pong. That means it's being played back and forth all the time, and then close it again. I now have the timeline down here, of course. And now let's try to apply an effect to the gauge. So add the effects thing. This is also new with the studio. So we have the effects component, and you see here all the effects, and I'll drag in a blur for now. I'll put in the blur here. I select, oh, no, the blur was not on the root level. I put it to the root level. I have the blur here. And now I have my component here, the speed dial. I move that into the blur. And then I have to reset the formatter for now once to actually see it. And now we have the blur effect applied. We don't see much because the radius is pretty small. So let's increase the radius a bit. And now you see that it blurs. Actually, I see it, but let's see. We need maybe even more blur. It's blurred, but okay. So now what we want is to animate this blur, of course. So we start from a really strong blur where, say, radius, let's say 50, right? I enter the keyframe here, and then I go to to the end, and I say record again, and then I want the blur to be like more subtle. And actually, we have to zoom in to really see the difference of the blur. So, okay. And now I also want to change the opacity, of course. So first, I put the opacity to 0 in the end and the beginning. And then I go to the end. And I add opacity 1 again. And also I play around with the scaling. So we go to advanced. Here we have scale, and then we scale it to, let's say, 0.1. And in the end, I scale it to 1 again. And now we can also live preview this. In the live preview, you see, it's really blurred in the beginning, and it zooms in and out again. And actually, it's jumping a little bit because I didn't align all the keyframes properly to the total end. I'll do that. Right? Some keyframes I set at 1 instead of 0, and that's where the jumping came from. So we just started again. But exactly this is where the nice live preview is so really nice.
Yes.
Right? And we will now keep that, having that on the side as you constantly see the animation now without any jumps, and you see that the blur really works nicely. It becomes sharp when it moves in, right? And now we show the last feature for that. We show how to work with easing curves. So I select this last keyframe of the scaling, and I say edit easing curve. And now by standard, by default, we have a linear interpolation. And let's just select something a little bit more fancy, like in this case, something like called standard here. And now you see that the zoom looks a lot different, of course, because now we have this different easing curve. And we could basically do the same, for example, for the radius. We can just move it a little bit so it becomes sharper first. And then again, we add the easing curve and say, yeah, let's say just a very simple ease-in curve. And now also the blurring behavior is significantly different. And that is now where the animation designer has to do a lot of work to really fine-tune this animation to the last detail. But we give him this really nice tool to make it as easy as possible.
So we're getting some reports that we're not seeing the live previews on the screen.
Because it's a different app.
Okay,
so we cannot
redo that.
Yeah. But we can.
Thank you, Salah.
Thank you. I think, do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
We were not lying. Sorry about that.
Yes, sorry about that. This is, I guess, a sharing limitation of the tool. But yeah, I mean, the live preview, the whole idea is that you keep it always like basically running. And that means you can run it on a different screen. You can run it on your target hardware or on the tablet, Android tablet for that matter. And then you basically work and design, and you keep designing until you nail the perfect design and the perfect pixel, basically. Yeah. Perfect color.
Yeah, we were just sharing the process of Qt Creator and forgot that it's a different window. But now you see it, and I hope you believe it. It was there all the time.
Right, right. So absolutely great. Thank you, Thomas. So I think that was fantastic. Thank you again. That was very fascinating how you did the whole demo. One little feature that I think I always like to mention that I think it's very important feature is the kind of like the side-by-side code editing that we have. So the design studio as such, as I mentioned earlier, is supposed to bring the designers and developers together. And that means that we cannot hide away the fact that you can actually see actual code of your design. So in fact, the whole design here, what you actually see and what you can do, you can also just go on the code mode, or for that matter, you can do both. You can see the design and the code right simultaneously at the same time and do changes right at the same time, basically. So this is a very powerful mode where both basically designers and developers can sit literally on one computer, or at least close to each other, and collaborate very, very iteratively. Right, so I'm gonna go to just finish my couple of slides that I've left. Just Right, so I'm gonna try to share my. Right. Just making it full screen. Yeah, so if you, yeah, right, thank you, Thomas. So to kind of wrap it up, basically, I think what it boils down to Design Studio, it's about developer-designer collaboration in order to achieve faster iterations, basically. Faster iterations meaning designers and developers can prototype as you design. As the design evolves and progresses, you do the prototyping at the same time. You're able to basically validate and improve the predictability of your design. That has to do with being able to test, validate your design as early as possible, right? So from Photoshop to actual code, it should just be a matter of basically a few clicks and exporting those graphic assets. Of course, in the end of the day, you're using the same tools, the same technology, right? So it's Qt, it's QML, and you are able to basically help designers achieve their design with Qt and QML, but at the same time, the same language, the same output of the design can be used by developers to finish the whole implementation of the whole HMI, of the whole user interface, and also do the integration with the application logic and so forth. Now, these improves a lot the time to market, rather shortens it a lot significantly. It basically helps you to eliminate any kind of waste, right? Because you are able to reuse components, right? Right in Photoshop, we saw how easy it was to create your own component directly from there. And you are able to reuse that component, restyle it, and make sure that you are owning the whole style, the whole styling basically as a designer, and that's very, very powerful, and in the end very efficient. So what we believe is that designers and developers and the collaboration between them fosters innovation and world-class user experience. And we believe that this happens through main three pillars: an effective and lean workflow, rapid prototyping with fast iterations, common tools and languages like Qt and QML and Qt Design Studio. And with that, I'd like to finish our presentation and go into Q&A session. I know there has been a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to go through one of them, each of them one by one. So yeah, starting with the first one, are you willing to make a Qt 3D Studio and Qt 3D cross-development engine? Example as the capability to load Qt 3D content in Qt 3D Studio presentation. Now, that is something certainly already happening today. So the Qt 3D Studio team, the whole actually Qt team, the graphics team, we're working towards making a 3D Studio runtime based on Qt 3D. So the short answer is yes, you will be able to do that in Qt 3D Studio. Right, so the next question, are you willing to extend item like QML logic elements to work with Qt 3D elements? Now, this is something, probably it's more for the 3D Studio team, but to my understanding and to my knowledge, you are able to create some sort of custom logic basically with Qt 3D Studio and combine that with QML. So Qt 3D Studio will basically, in the end of the day, will be a QML based item, right? So that you can integrate that with the rest of the QML UI that you have. I hope I answered your questions. The next one was basically, is there any plan to implement a bridge with Figma in the future? That's a very good question. Personally, I like Figma a lot. I'm kind of a big fan of them. We are definitely looking to create more bridges to the graphic tools. The first priority, as I mentioned in the slides, is Sketch. After that, we are definitely open to look at other tools. And Figma is certainly an absolute interesting tool to think of and consider about. So, great question. Right. Yeah, so I guess the other question has to do with how will this be available, basically? Will it be part of the Qt Enterprise bundle? I guess you mean part of the commercial offering as such. So Qt Design Studio, basically, Qt Design Studio will be available as a standalone product as such, meaning like you are able to download it without any dependency on Qt as such. This is kind of the plan we're looking at the moment. Now, of course, these are subject to change, and we will refine all of this by the time we are releasing version 1.0. So, but certainly the Design Studio as such will be, should be, and will be very easy to access kind of available tool, basically. So not be very dependent on other Qt packages. Right. There was one answer that I unfortunately did not see, and I kind of skipped. So there was a question basically saying that will there be a free community variant for open source projects? Well, the thing is with Qt Design Studio, you're able to do open source projects. So that is something we are not limiting as such. So, but the Design Studio itself is planned to be released as a commercial tool. So keep that in mind, that the Design Studio is a commercial available tool that can be used perfectly well for designing and developing commercial based applications. Now, if you want to do that for open source, that should be okay as well, but the tool itself is available under commercial terms only. Right. So the next question is about why is a raster-based program, Photoshop, used as the starting point of the process and not a vector-based program like Illustrator? Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I really personally have no opinion, or no preference in that. I mean, this is something that designers basically are whatever they're feeling
Maybe
comfortable.
I can interrupt shortly. One of the reasons we started with Photoshop is that Illustrator can be exported through Photoshop, and that seems to work at least to a certain degree. But of course, we understand that you have natural vector graphics, and you might want that they stay vector graphics through basically the whole process in the end. And for that, for now, we have the SVG shape item. And we really hope to improve that a little bit so that at least with copy and paste, you can bring over shapes over as Illustrator, like really easily.
All right.
But with a vector-based approach, it's really hard to preserve WYSIWYG, and that's why we don't have a direct exporting tool at the moment.
Right. That's a very good interruption, Thomas. Thank you for that. But also, we also understood that the market today still seems to be based a lot on Photoshop. So we realized that, and we need to kind of also kind of understand that even better. But Photoshop was kind of like the most used tool, at least among our customers. So, but Illustrator, as Thomas explained, you can easily kind of use Illustrator, create your SVGs there. You can copy paste the SVG path and use that also in Design Studio, or you can use import SVGs directly as resources. Right. Thank you, Roger. That's a very good comment, I have to say. Right. Okay, so there's one question. Does layer naming need to follow a specific standard Absolutely not. We don't have such restrictions. But what is kind of important is that do not rename the structure. If you want to do the round trip, right? So if you want to do re-exporting on the same folder, right? So if you rename your layers, you probably get, let's say, a confused meta information. So don't rename the layer names.
Yes. And the layer names are used as IDs in QML, so we might have to clean them up and we have to ensure they are unique. That's why we append the layer ID to the layer name, so it's always unique. So there's a couple of tweaks we do that, but basically you don't have to follow a specific standard when you do your Photoshop.
Right. So how does Qt Design Studio handle changes and updates of the design created in Photoshop? Very good question. And this is something that definitely it's one of those research items, and I'm pretty sure it will continue to be researched basically throughout 2018 and 19, because we really need to kind of understand all the corner cases there. Now we have an idea. We have a solution kind of that we are researching at the moment, and we hope to get somewhat get that done for the version 1.0. Now the approach here, and I'll keep it very simple and high level. I don't want to go into details now, but the approach is to create some sort of smart merging mechanism and smart merging tools based on layer IDs, basically. So that's what I mentioned earlier. Don't change the layer structure or the layer name. You can put any name you want, but don't change it afterwards. So if you keep that intact, then the round trips become very easy due to this merging, smart merging, basically, that we understand what was changed, and then we just apply the changes. So therefore, you don't lose any existing work that you do in Design Studio, but you simply change something on the Photoshop, re-import it again, and you keep on working where you left. So yeah, now of course there will be also other kind of mechanisms. One very simple and kind of naive mechanism is like you create copies. Basically, you create kind of snapshots of your design work, and then you just copy your work from the old one to the new one, and we will make that as easy, as intuitive as possible. So every time you import, you'll be asked if you want to overwrite the existing one, or if you want to create a copy of that, or you want to create in a different folder. So there will be some mechanisms and tools to make it easy for you to do the round trips as a designer, as well as for the developer. Right, but more will come to that for the version 1.0. Great question. Right, one more question from Jeff. When will this launch? So yes, so the Design Studio technology preview is targeted for next week, early next week. I should be around Monday or Tuesday. And then the version 1.0 is planned for end of this year, sometime around end of November, December timeframe.
There's one more question around, can you increase the speed value with the needle easily?
Can you increase the speed value with the needle?
Easily, yeah.
Get that question.
Yes. I'm not sure that either. Would be great if we can have some, but let's.
So what we did now is we didn't animate the needle, right? We basically just said that the needle is moving according to the value. Now, basically, the question is, how is the value animated, right? And the value usually will be animated by the backend. And of course, QML has this behavior concept. And with behaviors, you could, for example, define something like a low-pass filter that always animates the needle a little bit according to the change from the back end, or that compresses events from the back end. That's something we are also like investigating. That, for example, if there come too many changes from the back end, that we process them with pre-built components before we basically push them to the front end. So basically, like, yeah, you can think of a low-pass filter that does not react to very small changes immediately and things like that. But for the needle right now, when we did the speedometer, we didn't animate anything yet, right?
There was no animation on the needle. It was just the arc basically bound to the needle movement, right? So
and the value, which is the property of that component.
Exactly, and the value which Thomas created and exported.
I think that might be all questions we have for today.
All right. Then thank you everybody for taking the time participating to this webinar. I hope you are now as excited as we are. So the technology preview, like I mentioned, will be available next week. Yeah, more news will come, blog post, web page. So stay tuned. Thank you again.
Also, thank you from my
Great.
side.
Thank you both. If you have any questions that we didn't go through or you think of later on, you can send them into info@qt.io and we'll answer them for you then. But until then, we wish you a great day. Goodbye.